Everyone in this room has the same three basic psychological needs. And that's not me saying that. That's the core insight behind self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is a psychological concept that was popularized in the 1980s and revolutionized our understanding of human motivation and happiness. Self-determination theory holds that all people have the same three basic psychological needs, and when you have them, you have the foundation for motivation and happiness, and when you don't, you don't. And this is important to understand because when change comes to our work, it disrupts our access to these three fundamental psychological needs. So by understanding what they are, we give ourselves a roadmap to finding them when we need them the most. But before I tell you what they are, let me tell you what it is like to lose them. Years ago, I was working at another magazine, and it was going through a lot of change, a lot of directional change, a lot of leadership change, and then suddenly, I developed a very serious Twitter addiction. Very serious. I needed to know all the tweets. I would show up in the morning and I would spend the first hour at my desk just looking at Twitter, and then I would go to meetings and I'd be sneaking looks at Twitter, and then I'd go back to my desk and I'd interrupt myself every 5 minutes to look at Twitter, and then I'd go home and I'd be having dinner with my wife and I'd be looking at Twitter, and my wife would say, "Please stop looking at Twitter." And I wish I could tell you that the solution to this problem was listening to my wife. Usually is. But in this case, the solution to the problem was that I was fired. Or, as consultants like to call it, I was made available to industry. So, I was made available to industry, and I got a different job that I liked more. And suddenly this Twitter addiction disappeared. And I didn't understand that moment in my life until years later, when an entrepreneur introduced me to self-determination theory. And the more in which I studied it and applied it to the moments in which I was most or least motivated, the more in which everything clicked into place. So, it is now time to tell you what your three basic psychological needs are. I remember them by the acronym ARC. It's just a nice, simple way to remember it. ARC, A-R-C. Here they are. A is autonomy. You need to feel ownership over the decisions that you make. R is relatedness. You need to feel good relationships with those around you. And C is competency. You need to feel good at what you do. Autonomy, relatedness, and competency. These are your three basic psychological needs. And I love that term needs here, because needs don't go away. If you are hungry and you go to the refrigerator and it is empty, do you stop being hungry? No. You just go somewhere else to get the food, and that is what we do with our three basic needs as well. If we don't find our needs fulfilled in the most productive ways, we will go elsewhere, despite how unproductive it may be, to fulfill them. And once I understood this, what happened to me back at that job when I developed that Twitter addiction started to make a lot more sense. I literally just applied ARC to that experience. Let's go through it. So here I am, I'm at this job, it's going through a lot of directional change, a lot of leadership change, and suddenly I developed this Twitter addiction. Well, let's think. Did I have the autonomy that I needed at that job at that time? The answer was no, I did not, because I was having a lot of decisions handed down to me, and people weren't listening to my ideas. Did I have the relatedness that I needed? No, I didn't, because I was so annoyed at how things were running that I wasn't making an effort to connect with my colleagues, except for a guy named Rob, who also hated being there, and he and I would get lunch every day and just bitch about the place. Right? We've all had that friend. And did I have the competency that I needed? No. No. Because I had two bosses, and neither of them could agree on what belonged in the magazine, and my ideas were constantly getting killed. But now, let's look at Twitter. Did I have the autonomy that I needed on Twitter? Why, yes, I did, because I was able to say and do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. Did I have relatedness on Twitter? Yeah, sure, I was meeting people who had shared interests and we were connecting. Did I have the competency that I needed on Twitter? Yes, because I could say what I wanted and people would like and retweet it, and that felt good. Autonomy, relatedness, and competency. And I don't just tell you this to show you about when things go wrong, but rather because as I have studied this, I've discovered that this is an incredible self-diagnostic tool for you and for your teams and for anybody that you're working with, because they're all human beings and they all have the same 3 needs. You know, when something is changing and we suddenly feel confused, frustrated, a lack of motivation, it can feel really big and amorphous. You don't even know where to start. Where's the problem? How do I start to fix it? But this now gives you a literal checklist to go down. You can ask yourself, do I have the autonomy that I need in this situation? Does my team member have the autonomy that they need? If I'm implementing new software and somebody is resistant to it, do they have the autonomy that they need in this situation? If the answer is no, then how can that be fixed? What solution can drive a greater feeling of autonomy? The same is true in relatedness, the same is true in competency. When you start to think like this, you start to give yourselves very specific actions for things that used to feel amorphous. Because here's the thing, our work is and will always change, but our needs never do. So when you understand your needs, you can get what you need when you need it.